Hi, I'm Lon Kramer.
And I'm Myra Kramer.
Did you know that older drivers have a crash rate second only to that of teenage drivers?
Well, let's face it, we're slowing down a little. Even our eyesight's not what it used to be.
And that's why it's so important that aging drivers recognize their physical limitations and continue to work hard at improving their driving skills to help older drivers stay behind the wheel as many years as possible, driving safely and more carefully, not only to protect themselves, but to protect all those around them.
Andy Sarkisian, thanks for being with Graceful Aging, and we're at your test track. What do you do, and how is Ford looking ahead at aging?
Well, we take a look at the demographics that are going on as well as the societal issues, and we see an aging population, a population that's very used to their personal mobility and wanting to retain that personal mobility as long as possible and as safe as possible. There are independents. It's one of those things we looked forward to when we were a teenager, and certainly no one looks forward to losing that privilege as we get older. So we're looking at technologies to help extend safe driving. A couple of technologies that we have on many of our vehicles right now help people with regard to, those reaction times that may not be as quick as they used to be, or the flexibility that we have or are losing with regard to ability to turn around and see in our blind spot. So on reaction time, what we have is a radar in the front end of the vehicle that gives a forward collision warning a little earlier than you may notice otherwise. So it will notice the rate of convergence to traffic in front of you and give you a warning, both a light that lights up on the dash, sort of like a heads-up display simulating the brake lights of the vehicle in front of you, as well as a buzzer.
So is that just to shock me into awareness, or does that put my eyes on the road of what's in front of me?
Since that lights up high in a heads-up display, it's getting your attention forward.
So that's at the long setting.
We find in research that people don't always put their foot on the brake pedal as hard as possible. So when you do decide to brake, as opposed to maybe steering away from that threat, we will have pre-charged the brakes to the point when you first touch that brake pedal, you will get maximum stopping power for the shortest stopping distance.
A braking assist.
But it's as affordable and more affordable than what air conditioning would have been 20 or 30 years ago.
That's a good comparison.
It's rough out there. More cars, more congestion, more accidents, and more older drivers trying to steer clear and avoid a bad situation. Everyone knows that demographics are changing. We're living longer and drivers are getting older. 1 driver in 4 is 55 or older. At this age, certain skills begin to deteriorate. Vision, reflexes, flexibility, hearing. It's important for aging drivers to recognize limitations and adjust our driving habits.
You mentioned a third technology. What's that?
Well, sometimes accidents aren't avoidable, and sometimes grandma and grandpa are being transported in the back seat of a car. And what we find is when we look at injuries and fatalities over the age distribution, we all know about teenagers and their risks, and their inexperience, they're a little more risk-taking, they're not wearing their seatbelts as often as they should be. Well, at the other end of the spectrum, we found a phenomenon where the fatality rates were going up with older people. Mm-hmm. And we did a little bit further, deeper study on it. What we find is most people do survive an accident. But what happens as you get older, your bones get a little bit more brittle, and there's a higher incidence of rib fractures. With rib fractures, it becomes painful to breathe. When it becomes painful to breathe, you have a higher risk of pneumonia and therefore complications from pneumonia.
Yeah, breathing
and that can be serious.
Mm-hmm.
So what we've done is we developed an option. It's a rear seat inflatable belt. So we've taken the combination of 2 technologies that are well proven. Seat belts save lives, airbags save lives, and we put them together in one. And so in the rear outboard passengers of the Explorer, of a Flex, or of a Lincoln MKT, in an accident, the shoulder harness portion of the airbag, of the seatbelt, will blow up into like a sausage shape. And what that does is it distributes loads over a 5 times greater area than a conventional seatbelt. It takes the slack out of the system, it distributes the loads, and what it does is it greatly reduces, virtually eliminates the risk of rib fractures.
The belts protecting these crash test dummies demonstrate a world first, the introduction of an automotive rear inflatable safety belt.
By having an inflatable seat belt in the rear seat will add additional protection for the rear seat occupants.
In the blink of an eye, vehicle sensors will determine the severity of a crash. If required, each belt's tubular airbag inflates with cold compressed gas that flows through a specially designed buckle. The belts would inflate at a slower rate than a traditional airbag and help control head and neck motion for rear seat occupants, including the more vulnerable passengers, young children, and the elderly. Ford's inflatable belt helps spread crash force protection over 5 times more of the body to enhance head, neck, and chest protection.
The other neat thing about it is because it's a little bit padded in the belt, it's more comfortable to wear. How often do you hear people say about, oh, the belt's a little uncomfortable, it's digging into my shoulder. It's a little bit more padded. We've got research from people who told us it is more comfortable.
The inflatable belts could also help increase the relatively low rear belt usage rate, as Ford research participants say it is more comfortable than a traditional belt, with more padding and smoother edges.
That's really important because we need to encourage people to wear their seat belts, and not many people in the back seat do, only about 60% do, and we really want to get everybody buckled up because that truly does save lives.
The neat thing about it, though, is what about my grandchildren? You're putting an airbag where children could be seated.
Right.
The neat thing is we've tested it with child seats, with children. Because the bag is already where it needs to be, it doesn't need to be this powerful explosion coming into people. It just goes puff, sort of outward. And so it's safe for children as well.
And does it take the same impact to, say, generate the airbag? So if the airbag pops in the front, in the rear seats, if I'm wearing that seat belt, it's going to pop that.
Absolutely
impact?
correct. It's the same thing.
And again, in terms of cost and expense?
It's extremely affordable. It's an option because not everyone puts a lot of people in the back seat. It's under $200.
$200 to save a rib fracture. That's well worth it.
We provide value to people. We're not just throwing technology that's expensive. It's extremely affordable.